Welcome everyone to a special top 10 list. This is something that I want to start making a bit of a yearly tradition. I am going to do my top 10 movies of 2020, but not what you expect. This is not the movies that came out in 2020. That'll come later. When I've had a chance to catch up on some more movies, I'll do that with other people, and we'll share our top 10 list in a couple of months. It was March last year, I think, when we finally got to the 2019 list. But this is the top 10 movies that I saw for the first time that didn't come out in 2020. This is the top 10 legacy films or old movies, whatever you want to call it. I hesitate to call them old because I think there's one or two that are not that old. They're only a couple of years old. But every year, I want to go back and I want to find more films. I want to fill in those blanks. I want to discover new things and see more movies with directors I like and so on and so on. And I like to kind of encourage myself to do that, and I feel like part of that should be to celebrate what I did manage to get to see at the end of the year. It wasn't enough. I'm not happy with the amount I actually got to watch this year that wasn't new. I watched a lot of old movies, but just because it's easy to put them on as sort of side material or background noise or on streams when I'm watching with other people, it tends to gravitate towards a lot more to schlock and B movies and bad stuff. And I actually have a separate idea for looking at some of that as well, maybe for New Year's, to make that maybe a tradition as well. I want to look at some of that stuff. But this is going to be my top 10 movies that I saw for the first time in 2020 that were not released in 2020. So I'll start with number 10. And this is a very recent one as far as watching it goes, because it's a Christmas movie, and that is Dial Code Santa Claus. We did this on Screams After Midnight, myself and Tim, and it is a movie about a kid who's got lives in a fairly rich house. It's a French film from 1989, so it's just about a year before Home Alone came out, and that's important given the context of what it is. It's this kid who basically loves action movies, and the opening of the film is him sort of dressed as Rambo, and he's doing like a commando suit up montage, and this crazy guy finds his way to his house, partly out of revenge, partly just because he's psychotic. But he dresses as Santa. He is deranged. He draws first blood, and by that I mean he kills the kid's dog, and it becomes a Home Alone-esque movie, but with a kid who is willing to go further, and or more importantly, a villain who is clearly psychotic, and you're worried that he might do a lot of nasty things to the kid if he catches them. But the kid's got like cameras everywhere. He's already got like all these traps set up because it's just something that he does. But it's way more. It's Home Alone meets First Blood. That is the best way I can describe it. And it's tense and kind of dark in places, but it's also really wonderfully cheesy in others. It's got like sequences that are essentially just homaging like action movie moments. There's one I won't say it too spoiler, but there's a moment or a sequence later on that is essentially doing this sort of like heroic burial type scene, and the music that's playing is like just this perfect choice, but it's taking it dead seriously. It is a gem of a film, and I encourage everyone to seek it out. It is on Shudder, so it's fairly easy to access now. For a long time, it was not available anywhere outside of France. So I encourage you to track down Dial Code Santa Claus. Now, it's maybe a bit late to watch it for this Christmas because by the time this goes out, it'll be late Christmas Day, whatever. But I encourage future viewings of Dial Code for Santa Claus. My number 9 is a classic. It is The Devil and Miss Jones, making use of the old Criterion channel. As a few of the films on this top 10 are, although I do not make use of it nearly enough. I feel like if I actually watched at least one per week, I'd probably have a top 10 of nothing but Criterion channel movies. But as it is, I have a handful. So, Devil and Miss Jones is a classic story of the rich guy who owns a department store and is mad that the workers are unhappy. He decides to go undercover, undercover boss essentially, as a new sort of poor employee to the store. But of course, he falls in love with the woman who works there, and he's constantly trying to juggle the fact that he's learning about how their lives are, how they're affected by the wages they're paid, how management treats them, all that kind of good stuff. Honestly, it's kind of refreshing to watch a movie with a plot like this that's not modern because it doesn't fall into a lot of the the same hijinks that a modern movie would. Doesn't make a lot of the dumb jokes that a modern movie would. It just kind of plays it very kind of heartwarming. It is funny. Don't get me wrong. There's comedy, but it's kind of heartwarming, and you kind of get the meaning behind the story. It's still kind of the most important thing. Whereas I feel like movies that do this type of plot now, it's all about the wacky moments he's going to get himself into. It plays it way more subdued, in a classic Hollywood fashion, and I actually think it suits this plot better. So I really enjoyed visiting this one and sort of discovering this this title I'd heard before and going back and watching this old black and white movie from the 40s. So I would recommend this one. The performance from the lead, the rich guy, is very good. My number 8 is a documentary, and I don't tend to have documentaries in my top 10s, but I happened to watch American Movie this year, which came out in 1999, and it is the story of an aspiring filmmaker from, I think, Wisconsin, and he talks about wanting to make this big movie that he wants to do, but he can't afford to finish it, so he decides to raise a little bit of funds to finish a short film that he already had in the works. The short film is a story about witchcraft. It's called Coven, except that it's pronounced Coven, because this writer director thinks that Coven sounds like oven, and that's stupid. And I think telling you just that one part, that one detail, maybe sets you up for exactly why this is an entertaining documentary. Um, it the character and his friend that help him make these movies are kind of, I don't want to say dumb. That's a bit harsh, perhaps, but certainly, certainly they're characters. They're a pair of characters, and it's this documentary that follows them throughout the year, kind of like trying to get this short film finished, and then so on and so on. But he's surrounded by a delightful cast. His grandfather, who lends him a lot of his money, he's got a cameo in the movie, and that stuff's very funny. But the funny thing is despite the fact that there is a lot of it where you're kind of laughing at the people or how silly they are, or kind of the weird situations they put themselves in, or the weird like logic that he has about the way he's doing things. There is kind of like a heartwarming determination about the whole thing. There's kind of this thing where no matter what, he was going to get this finished, and it took him a ridiculous long time. But no matter what, he was determined to, have no sleep some nights, scrape by on barely any money for other things. There's this determination to get his short movie done, and it's kind of a heartwarming. Like, this is how tough it is to actually make movies, and whether or not the final product it may be good or not, it's kind of a love letter to the passion of wanting to be a filmmaker through this very specific and weird lens that is kind of encouraging. It's kind of, I didn't dislike The Disaster Artist. I thought there was some stuff to enjoy there, but for the most part, the jokes were just, hey, James Franco's playing Tommy Wiseau. There was a couple of behind the scenes bits that were entertaining, but for the most part, it was a little bit of a parody. This feels like it's a way better Disaster Artist than the Disaster Artist is, and it's kind of more from a genuine place, and was not like shrouded with like the reputation after the fact. The problem in a lot of ways with Disaster Artist is the Ribbon's such a known thing, and everyone reveres it as the best worst movie of all time, and it's this Citizen Kane of bad movies. No one really. This was made at the time. This documentary was made as the thing was happening. So, and then afterwards, it's not really built up. This documentary is the most well-known thing about all this, as far as I'm aware. But it's well worth a watch. I recommend it. My number 7 is an early Brian De Palma film. It's called Sisters, from 1972, and it's kind of a prototype for something that he would go to do later. There's a lot of very Brian De Palma ideas in here, and when I say Brian De Palma ideas, I mean ideas that he is taking from Hitchcock and shaping into his own sleazier vision. It's definitely a prototype to a movie called Body Double that he did about a decade or so later that I love and probably might be my favorite Brian De Palma film. But this is Margot Kidder in this film, but it's really, really good. It's really well directed, and there's some fantastic stuff. The ending does get a bit weird and wacky, but all the suspense and the thriller elements there's a little bit of Rear Window in there because there's a witness to a murder across the street, but all the build up to the murder and how the murder plays, and then all the aftermath of the murder, where the neighbor who saw this is trying to get the police involved. and there's like a lot of split screen as the body's being covered up and there's stuff going on. A lot of really cool, exciting stuff that's really experimental from a filmmaking perspective and very Brian De Palma and very thriller. As Wesker is trying to sabotage the cat behind me. So moving on to number 6. And that is Stranger Than Paradise. This is a very early Jim Jarmusch film. This is one I watched on Criterion Channel. And it's a movie that doesn't have a whole lot of plot. It's about this guy living in New York and his cousin who he's never met. She comes to visit, not really visit him. She's kind of there visiting other family members, and his aunt or whoever says, "Hey, look after your cousin," while she's in New York. And it's very slice of life. It's very quiet. It's very, it's very. I've not seen a lot of Jarmusch films, but it's definitely kind of in line with what I have seen from him. But it's black and white. It's very low budget. It's very low budget, and it's basically kind of him falling for his cousin, and then his best friend also falling for his cousin, and then there's a bit of a road trip that goes on to it, and it's kind of an examination of how these characters have been kind of seduced by the idea of what's worth having in America, and then her kind of reaction and attitude to, is it worth? Is this that great? Should this be something? Because he's kind of like abandoned his heritage where he comes from in Europe, where she hasn't. She's still very much, and I forget where it is. Maybe Romania, maybe Hungary. I can't remember the exact country that it came from. This was an earlier in the year watch, but I really enjoyed it. It was all of the dialogue felt very natural. It felt very down to earth. It felt very, everything almost felt ad-libbed in a way that wasn't annoying. It felt very natural, and there's some genuine funny beats in there. I remember the aunt or the grandmother being especially kind of funny whenever she popped up. So it's a really good little character study. And despite the fact that it is just people talking for the most part, it's a very easy breezy watch. Like the time, like the 90, 100 minutes, whatever it is, went in very quickly. And I found myself kind of just thinking about what these characters are, all of their bonds. Like something as simple as like just awkwardly sitting there and waiting for the dinner table to be set up felt like it had a lot of weight. It felt like it meant something that he was waiting for her to do it, or she was waiting for him to do it, or she was making noise trying to vacuum as he was sitting there when they were kind of in a forced living situation at first. Like all of these things were telling a story without really saying much or without doing anything extravagant, but there was a story being told in the littlest actions. It's really good direction. So, yeah, Stranger in Paradise, or Stranger Than Paradise, sorry. Number 5 is a more recent film. It is First Reformed, starring Ethan Hawke and Amanda Seyfried from a couple of years ago. 2017, I think this was. Ethan Hawke plays a priest who is very disturbed when a young man who comes to him for advice often and, consultation, whatever you do with a priest. I don't know, I'm an atheist. But he kills himself. And it turns out that he was actually building a vest, a suicide vest. And it becomes kind of this slow, and it's actually from the writer of Taxi Driver. And once you actually know that, you can kind of recognize it, that it's kind of the story of Taxi Driver, roughly. So it's a very similar character story, but with a priest who's starting to question the world around him, starting to question what the church supports and doesn't support in the world. One example is that one of the biggest donations to the church, one of the biggest supporters, is this company. I think it's an oil company who's ruining the planet, or it was something like that. But it was some company that's having a really big negative environmental impact, and he's slowly kind of noticing this, and it's this just very well slow build, and it's in 4:3, which is a really interesting choice in 2017. It feels very stark. The performance from Ethan Hawke's very good. It's filled again, I think some of my favorite movies tend to be the ones where they can make quiet moments feel like they mean everything, where you're really lingering on every pause. You're waiting for the awkward silence to end, and it's not just because it's not in the opposite end of the scale where the filmmaker doesn't know how to edit things, and it's just kind of got all this dead space where every single pause means something. Everything has a beat to tell in the story, or to tell you what the character is going through. And he's also lying about being sick. He's currently sick as well, which he's also going through. So it's kind of this sort of midlife crisis breakdown as a priest. Very Taxi Driver, but he goes in some different places as well. So I very much enjoyed First Reformed. And it's funny because at the start of the year I had just seen Joker for the first time, and this was much later in the year. But I remember watching this and thinking, "Hey, this is a good sort of like companion film to Taxi Driver, as opposed to Joker, which was hot trash." Um, so that's First Reformed at number 5. Number 4 is a very interesting film called Until the End of the World. This film, and it's full. Well, it was full. I think there's technically even longer one, but the longer cut, because it was released at just under 3 hours, but the cut that's on Criterion and the cut that's on the Blu-ray is 4 hours and 45 minutes, in that range, just under 5 hours. It is absolutely silly in length. It is a Wim Wenders film, a director who I very much love, and this was exciting getting to experience one of his other films. William Hurt is in there. It's a science fiction film that's about essentially this woman who sort of chases William Hurt around the planet. It's shot in location in multiple continents, several countries, and there's a science fiction element where it is set in the sort of the near future, but then there's a bit of like I'll call it like dream technology that kind of becomes part of the plot. I mean, that's funny. It's so long that it's like 3 hours before it even comes up, but then it's like really important to the plot. And it's very much a meditation on human nature and who these characters are and what it means to be human and what it means to dream and how important memories are. The reason why the dream technology is being created in the first place is because it's very important to a character to sort of like let someone see something, someone who's went blind. And I don't think that's spoiling too much because it's such a separate detail to the journey itself. But it feels like a very unique world. It feels like a very lived-in world as we're traveling around it. And yeah, I mean, you may have to watch it in a couple of sittings because it is very long. It's just physically a very long movie to get through because it's longer than any Lord of the Rings movie, and it's longer than I mean, it's the longest movie I've ever seen. I know there's at least one more that's longer that I do want to see at some point. Because I've become a fan of Bellatar's films, and he's got I think it's a 7-hour movie he's done. That one day I'm going to like brave and say no, I'm doing that. This is the day I'm spending on this. But that takes a lot of takes a lot of motivation to sit there and watch something like that. And this took a lot of motivation. We reviewed this on the A, so you can go check out my full thoughts with Tara on that. This was one we checked out because it was just there on Criterion. It's like, oh hey, this is an interesting movie, and I like the director. Let's watch this. And I found it to be a very meditative film. It actually goes. It's not exactly like Stranger Than Paradise. They have very different tones, but they're both similar in the sense that they're both very low key films. Even though this one has a lot more adventure in it, not in an action way. There's not a lot of action. It's just not that at all. But there's a lot of adventure because of all the traveling and all the globe trotting that goes on. But again, it left me thinking when I was finished about what it was about, and it left me thinking about what the characters have went through. And if it sticks in my head like that, where I'm actually caring about what it meant, and I'm not just saying that meant nothing, I'm saying no, there's stuff to this beyond just the surface level plot. What was it saying about humanity and dreams and getting lost in dreams and never living in for the world as it is, and not just like the fantasy of what you want and so on. Very, very good. So that is number 4. Number 3 is A Woman in Chains. This is from the 70s. This is the last film, I believe, from Henry Georges Clouzot, if I remember correctly. This was, and it's the only film I've seen by him in color, but he did Diabolique, he did Wages of Fear, which I love those two movies, and I've seen a couple other ones. We actually, funny enough, we watched and recorded 3 reviews for 3 films that he did. The first of which went up. So the 121 with me and Connor talking about Le Corbeau is up, which was also pretty good. And then his follow-up film to that, which the name I can't remember and pronounce because it was just in French. And then this one, were all reviewed, and I actually have the reviews sitting for this and the other one. They just haven't went up yet. I'll get around to it. They've just been kind of sitting in the vault waiting to go up. Because 121's not been kind of an ongoing thing that's been recorded, so it's not been kind of at the forefront of my mind. But this is a very... I would kind of describe this as a sort of precursor to something that came later in like a film like Secretary. which is it's about a character, a woman in this case, who's in like a married life, who becomes seduced by the idea of this more alternative individual, this photographer who is very erotic in his photography, very sexualized, and it becomes kind of this dominating relationship, but not in a like he's not dominating in a sense where he is forcing her into things. He just kind of like acts a certain way and opens the door, and she becomes enamored with the idea of being dominated. So it's all, as weird as to say this, it's all consensual domination. It's not. I wouldn't quite say it's S&M. It's more of a just an attitude and more just of how they speak to each other, as opposed to something like Secretary that was a lot more in your face with here's shackles and weird kinky games and stuff. Um, but it's a really strong drama, and I don't really expect any less from this director, from Clouseau, because everything I've seen from him has been at least very solid, if not spectacular. And this isn't as great as his masterpieces, Diabolique and Wages of Fear, but I found this to be a very interesting film for him because it was tackling a very tough subject, a very taboo subject, and funnily enough, Le Corbeau, which the review is up for, was also kind of dealing with taboos. Definitely, it was made in the 40s, I think, so that was like a lot more muted, and it got him in a lot of trouble at the time, I think, for tackling the subjects that it was of adultery and so on and so on. This does have adultery, but it kind of again it's one of those things where the ending really made me think about what it was saying about the character and about what she'd went through. And the ending does have a lot to say. I should probably I should post those reviews, this one in particular, because the ending is definitely a bit of a swerve, and not in like a sort of hey shock twist kind of way, not in that way. Just the turn it takes at the end definitely added an interesting I don't know, possible extra subtext or extra theme to, or even just extra contextualization to what the rest of the movie had been doing. Because up until that point, it was about sexual freedom, it was about all these things, and it was all performed very well. All the scenes with them and like her sort of taking chances and doing things for the first time. Moments that could have come off silly if they weren't directed and performed properly, with certain dialogue that was sexual in nature, approaching sexual, and kind of innuendos, things like that, which could have come off as silly comedy, but they didn't. They always come off as very intense. They always come off as the way the characters are feeling them in the scene. And I found it to be a very thought-provoking film by the end of it. And again, about a subject isn't necessarily a subject I think, oh, hey, this is the best subject for a movie that's my taste. But when you give it to a filmmaker who knows what they're doing, you give it the thought process that it requires and deserves, and all of a sudden you have this very intricate exploration of someone being seduced because their life as it is isn't exciting anymore. So I recommend Women in Chains. We watched those 3 Clouseau movies and reviewed them. Again, only the first one's up, and I put it up like May, so it's been quite a while since I posted that first one. Because all 3 of them were up on Mubi, which I got for a month just so that I could watch these 3 movies. And it was very, very good. Mubi's kind of like it's not quite UK Criterion, but it's a lot of Criterion-esque movies that end up on there. In fact, I think one of these was in Criterion as well, but not all 3 of them. So they're not the easiest to find, I don't think. I'm sure there's some Blu-rays or DVDs you can track down, but or find them on a service like that. But that is Women in Chains, and that was from the 70s. I can't remember the exact year, forgive me. Number 2 is something a bit wackier. This is something, so one of the things that I'm planning on doing in the second video for this, where I talk about worst and so bad they're good, I'm thinking of having like a top 5 of like good schlock, like not so bad it's good, just genuinely good schlock. And this arguably could be in that category. However, I love this movie so much that it's not going there. It's going straight to number 2 of my top 10. And that, my friends, is the 1988 version of The Blob. I freaking love this movie. I had never seen it. It's got Shawnee Smith in it, one of the Dylans. Art LaFleur's in there, who you probably don't know, but I know him. He pops up in a bunch of things. He's played a baseball player like 3 times. He's in the Transfers movies. He pops up. But this is surprisingly funny. The practical gore effects from the blobs like killing people are wonderful and entertaining. It's paced perfectly. It's the right length. It's everything. Me and Tara reviewed this on the ACE. We also did the original film, and then also the weird kind of sequel that was in the 70s. And the original is a fun movie. It's a fun 50s sci-fi. But this is the 1980s version of it in every sense of the word. This is the 1980s version. These filmmakers, they saw the thing and they said, "Oh, we can do a blob that kind of is inspired by the effects in that. We can have funnier characters. We can have more sort of black humor, and it's not this like, sort of goody two shoes. The characters are, Steve McQueen's the. I mean, I think that people talk about him as if he's a bit of a rebel, and they shouldn't trust him in the 50s. But it's very mild, and ultimately comes off as a little good guy who helps everyone solve the problems. 1988 Blob is delightful. It's got a tongue in its cheek the entire time, and some of the kills are wonderful. So obviously, as it is great a piece of filmmaking as the last few films I mentioned, of course it's not. But as for what it is, it is amazing. So Blob 1988, full stamp of approval. Which leads me to my number one movie that I watched this year that was not released this year, and this is a classic. This is from the 50s, and this is also I didn't put this as a separate award because it's kind of just obvious from where it is. Because one of the things that I'm going to put in the second video that I'll do next week is my biggest disappointment of the year. Like something that I was hoping that I would like, a classic that I was expecting to like, and then didn't. So that's coming in the next one, along with the other mostly negative stuff. This is easily my biggest surprise of the year. And that is my number one, which is the original 310 to Yuma. It's a surprise for a couple of reasons. It's a surprise because I like the remake with Christian Bale and Russell Crowe, but I don't love it. I didn't love the movie. I thought it was a bit overlong. I didn't necessarily like everything. The ending I wasn't particularly fond of. I definitely remember. It's been a while since I've seen it, admittedly. But also because I don't typically think of myself as liking westerns before the spaghetti stuff. I love the Dollars trilogy, Good, the Bad, the Ugly. My favorite western is Once Upon a Time in the West, which is the same director, Sergio Leone. I love those movies, and there's a few key examples from later that I also really like. The Coen Brothers' True Grit, for example, I really like. I've never seen the original, but I do really like the new version with that. And there's a few others. There's a few other key ones that I really quite like. But for the most part, I don't really think of myself as enjoying classic westerns. And in fact, it's not quite on my worst list. But because I love this so much, I thought maybe I should try some other older westerns. And I tried a John Wayne movie this year, Rio Bravo, and I thought it was boring as shit. Which is kind of what I expected from older westerns. I didn't expect to really get into them, and maybe this is just painting with a broad brush, and maybe this has taught me that I kind of need to try different ones. Although I have to admit, the one starring John Wayne, I'm kind of not feeling anymore. But the 310 to Yuma, I thought it was directed wonderfully. I thought the performances were great. I thought every scene was building, and the tension of this guy being tasked to escort this prisoner to the train station, for the 310 to Yuma to be there in time. And kind of the weird bonding that happens between them, where the bad guy is going to have his team coming to try and get him. He's going to try and escape, but there's this weird bond that forms. The ending to this one, I think, is much better than the original. Than the remake. And I didn't expect that. I expected this to be a bit more kind of just like sort of weaker. And not that I think of old movies as weaker, but there's definitely types of movies where I think if you look at a lot of science fiction from the 60s and 70s. I definitely don't like it as much as science fiction from the 80s onwards because I feel like it was kind of like prototyping things. It was kind of like, okay, the ideas are kind of there, but this is the total opposite, where I think the new 310 to Yuma is overindulgent and trying too hard to do more than it should. I think the original is perfectly paced. I think every scene has great character interaction, tells you enough about the characters. The relationship that forms had me very tense, had me, feeling an interesting bond, and I think the ending really hit a high chord where I was like, yes, this is the ending that makes sense. I feel things for this ending. I was so invested in those characters in a way that I was not expecting to. There's no review for this up, by the way. This was not for review. I just watched this. I did watch it on stream, so a couple people watched it with me, but that was a really dull stream, I think, because I was just quietly sitting watching it for the most part because I was really into it. and I thought it was extremely well directed and very well performed. And as much as I really like the actors who were in the new one, I think the performances from the two actors in this were much, much better. So that's my surprise of the year, as well as my number one uh, classic movie that I watched, which is 3:10 to Yuma. So, and I hope to do this again next year. I want to do this again. I want to try and encourage myself to try and see more movies that aren't just new. Although I do struggle to also keep up with everything that's worth seeing that is coming out. I still have movies from 2020, 2019, 2018 that I want to get to, but I want to fill out those older movies. I want some of the fundamentals. I want some classics. I want some gems. I want some of the weirder stuff. And try it. And sometimes it doesn't work out. I watched a movie this year called Spider Baby from the 60s, and I didn't really care for it, even though it kind of sounded cool. They're not all going to work out, but a lot of them will, and a lot of them will add to those sort of classics that you kind of like, hey, that was worth watching again. That said, the one that's almost 5 hours will, probably won't be rewatched as much just because it's 5 hours long, but other than that, it's good stuff. So like I say, I'm planning on doing like a worst 10 and a couple of other things bundled with that. I didn't want to bundle any of them with this because I felt like this is just the top 10 good movies. And, I recommend these. But this is obviously a very personal thing. None of these are particularly relevant right now. It's not something people are going to be searching for. I just hope this is an interesting kind of, almost like a sort of yearly movie log, as it were. Like, here's stuff I watched that I think was worth going back and checking out. And I was excited to see. So, so I look forward to, I guess, the rest of the categories, if you will, in the next one. I'll probably not explain them as much because there's actually a few different categories to go through in the next one. Like I say, that'll be top 10 worst, 5 so bad it's good, 5 pretty actually fun schlock, which is kind of close to so bad it's good, but not really. There's a distinction, I think, at least to me. Although people might disagree with the picks on either one. And then the one disappointment of the year. So that's what's coming up in the next. And there was a lot of good movies. Don't take this 10 as the only good 10 I watched. Like I said, the other movies from Clouseau I really liked. I saw Upstream Color this year. I saw Ford v Ferrari this year. I saw the Stepford Wives this year. The original Stepford Wives, that is, from the 70s. All pretty good movies. Tales from the Hood I saw this year. That was pretty great. So there's all the good stuff. But these were the best 10. So thank you for joining me. Hopefully this was a fun thing to put out on Christmas Day. Kind of a look back at the year, but not the year itself. I look back at, what I was trying to expand my movie horizons this year. Some of them were for reviews. Some of them weren't. So hopefully you had fun with this. So let me know what some of the better movies you saw for the first time this year were, that weren't out this year. And I'll read those in the comments. Feel free to like as well. Liking is super important on YouTube. It is the free and simple way to support us. You can also support us financially over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV for as little as $1 per month and get bonuses for your troubles. $5 tier gets you early access to a bunch of stuff, a little bit of voting rights, stuff like that. So go and have a look and see if you're interested in any of that, and help support the content and keep it all coming, which is the main part of it more than anything else. But that is me. So Twitter at mail_fuzz for channel updates, or me personally at Wibble89. But thank you very much once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching movies, and if you can get it, it's always nice to have diplomatic immunity.